apparently I trust him in my photo class.
Okay, since my assistant has closed the door, I think I'm going to start. I am Robert SanGeorge, as it says there. I am normally, my day job is career advisor for SPA graduate students and some seniors within School of Public Affairs. Been doing that for about 15 years, actually, after a long career, mostly abroad with the United Nations and a couple of other places. So we're going to talk about internships and how to get them. First thing I want to tell you is, if you're here to figure out how to get an internship for the spring, it's mostly too late. Okay, they're pretty much gone. I mean, there are a few here and there, and you might get lucky. So I don't want to completely rain on your parade, but basically, we are now looking at summer internships, and there are dozens of them. Now, I want to ask, how many of you are in hard sciences as opposed to social science? No one. Okay. So raise your hand if you're SIS, SPA, SOC, or social sciences and CAS. About everybody. Okay, good. So I know who I'm talking to now. How many of you are grad students? A few. Okay. All right. Yeah, I am mostly informed about internships in social science, right? And that's kind of what we're going to do. I invite you to ask questions at any time. If you ask a question about something I'm going to address in an upcoming slide, I'll ask you to be patient. Come on in, we just started. And we go from there. I think I just put any key. Yeah, there we go. First thing I touch, and where I don't want personalization. Sorry. Ridiculous. Sorry, we'll get this straight in. Oh, it looks okay. It doesn't look okay here, but it looks okay there. That's fine. That's all that matters, I think. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. All right. First thing you got to do is plan ahead, and particularly with regard to what I just said a moment ago. You should have a career advisor review your resume template, the basic resume that you're using. Try not to rely on advice that you got from a family friend or your parents who last looked for a job 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. There are professional career advisors all over this campus in the various schools, and it doesn't take that long to get your resume reviewed. And you might find that you're way off track. I mean, of the people who come to see me, I would say, this is mostly grad students, I would say about 40% I recommend really significant changes in the resume, meaning that they were way off track in terms of how the resume should look for what employers in this area expect to see. Now, you've got to start early. Summer internships are posted January through early April, pretty much. There may be some later on in April, but probably not very many. So if you're going to look for an internship for the summer, you need to start now. I maintain a Twitter account in which I tweet jobs and internships that are focused on the kinds of things that people in School of Public Affairs are interested in. Some of you, even if you're not SBA, may be interested in accessing this account, and I'll have more information on that in a moment. Since January 5th, I've probably posted 100. January 5th was my first day back. That was your first day back. I probably posted 100 paid internships, and I only, with a very few exceptions, I only post paid internships because I just don't believe in paid internships, and neither do most of you, I'm sure. Fall internships, you should be looking from possibly even late April, but definitely May through early August, and you won't find very many as we get further into August. And by the time you're back here on campus in late August, it will mostly be too late to look for fall internships. Winter and spring, I mean, internships in the spring are for the spring semester are called spring, but in case you didn't notice, it really isn't spring outside. And so it's winter spring. Those, internships in the winter spring can start as early as mid to late January and as late as, say, mid-February. It just depends on the employer. If you are going for an internship with the federal government or a federal contractor, and by the way, there aren't very many federal internships out there. They're pretty much done with the inauguration of our current president. You're going to look at application deadlines way ahead of time. If you're interested in an internship with the CIA, generally what they say is you should be applying for an internship with CIA 12 months ahead of time. And the CIA pretty much only does summer internships. So that means you should be, it's too late for this coming summer. You're looking at summer 2027, okay? And you need to have that in by May, this coming May, okay? And the deadlines are not quite as crazy as that with some other intelligence agencies. But for example, the State Department, if they're doing internships, I don't know whether they are. I don't think they are, but if they are, typically you've got to be applying 5 or 6 months ahead of time. And other agencies, you should go to their websites and see what they say as to whether they're doing internships under the Trump administration and how far in advance you need to be applying. I do know that the hardcore intel agencies are still pretty much doing internships, okay? Although things can change, of course. Another thing is, if you're, anybody here from COGAD? One lonely person there, sort of, right? If you're interested in, and you don't have to be from COGAD to be interested in management consulting firms. The major management consulting firms, Deloitte, McKinsey, Bain Consulting, Boston Consulting Group, they often recruit their summer interns in the previous falls, meaning, like November, okay, sometimes October. And if you're interested in those kind of internships, which by the way, if you expect to get a job at one of those places, you will greatly improve your chances of getting a job there if you do an internship first, because they will treat it as a kind of a proving ground for you. So that's where you've got to think like 9 months ahead of time, not because of any security clearance, but because they just do things way in advance, okay? Now, speed of response, okay? High quality paid internships, not all paid internships are high quality, but high profile employers. Let's talk about the think tanks, okay? Brookings Institution, the Council on Foundations, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, et cetera. When they post internships, they're pretty much all paid. They will get 100 applications in 48 to 72 hours, okay? That doesn't mean that those are the only people who are going to be hired, but your odds will improve greatly if you're among the first people to apply. And for smaller employers, I mean, those are big time employers that hire a lot of interns. But you want to have your internship search set up in such a way that if at all possible, you're trying to maximize the chance that you're going to see new internship postings within the first 24 hours after they come up online, particularly if there are specific employers that you're looking at where you really want to get an internship, okay? And when you see an internship that you really want to apply for, do not delay. I mean, if it's, what's today, Tuesday? I guess, Thursday, today's Thursday, wow, time flies. Let's say it was Tuesday, okay? And you saw an internship you wanted to apply for. And you said to yourself, oh, I've got so much work to do. I'll get to it on the weekend. What that means is because it's been posted already, you've probably gone from being maybe the 25th email that an employer, like one of the major ones I've just mentioned, the 25th email they'll get to maybe the 125th email. And what that means is your chances of getting an internship are way low. Just a second, I'm really dry. Speed is really important, both in terms of how you set up your search so that you're seeing things quickly after they're posted and that you're applying quickly. Quickly means immediately that day or within 48 hours, let's say, okay? But try not to delay into the weekend. And one other thing, people tell me all the time, I can't possibly get an application out for a job or an internship in that quickly, because it takes me 3 or 4 days to write a cover letter. I start writing it and then I get writer's block, so I leave it alone, and then I get back to it the next day, and then I get back to it the next day. The answer is you don't do that. And I'm going to explain a little bit about how you can avoid writer's block with cover letters. So don't obsess over them, okay? Your resume, 80 to 90% of the time, that's what's going to determine whether or not you get an interview, okay, for an internship and for a job too, really. That doesn't mean cover letters are irrelevant, because when you get an interview, they will read the cover letter, okay? And the cover letter will, to some degree, guide the employer as to what questions they ask you in the interview. But a lot of employers don't even look at cover letters until they've decided whether to interview you, meaning that it's all on your resume, all right? So what should you be doing with cover letters for internships now, I'm talking about? So obviously your name and your contact information at the top, right? Same as, well, it doesn't have to be identically formatted the way you did it on the resume, but name and contact information at the top. Don't worry about finding out the name of some human resources person to whom you're going to address the cover letter. It doesn't matter. Just, you know, to the Brookings Institution, or dear hiring manager, whatever. It doesn't, I know students who waste a tremendous amount of time trying to find somebody's name. And I will tell you, having been a senior executive at a big think tank here in DC, one of the first things the HR director said to me was, don't ever tell anybody how to get in contact with me, because she was just overwhelmed with work. And the last thing she wanted was tons of emails flooding into her inbox, or people actually trying to get past the receptionist to talk to her on the phone. She just didn't have the time. And so, yeah, they want to remain largely hidden. They really do. Whether it's a hiring manager or somebody who is a human resources person. So just, you know, the employer's name of employer, email address. This is not the 80s, which I remember really well and you don't. So it doesn't matter that you've got their street address on it, okay? My suggestion is that you're looking at writing 3 substantive paragraphs of no more than 6 or 7 lines each. Size 11 or 12 font, probably size 12. Don't fiddle with the margins. Just stay with the standard margins that you get. And the last paragraph, there's a 4th paragraph, which is just going to be, thank you for considering my qualifications. I look forward to hearing from you. That's it. Okay? So when I say 3 paragraphs, that means, you know, 3 substantive paragraphs where you're arguing for yourself in a certain way, but it's got to be short and sweet, because guess what? Employers don't like to read long cover letters. And never, ever, ever write a cover letter longer than a page. I mean, that's a disaster. That's an invitation for them to just throw it out. Emphasize your research skills, your analytical skills, your written and oral communication. There was a survey done by the Chronicle of Higher Education. Some of you may have heard of it. It's the flagship publication for universities in the United States. They did a survey of more than 4,000 employers in the US who hire recent college graduates, okay? And so we're drifting over into the job arena, not so much internships, but it still applies to internships. So they interviewed more than 4,000 employers and said, what do you look for in upcoming and recent college graduates, meaning people who are going to get BAs, in some cases, master's degrees. And 4 things stood out above everything else: strong research skills, strong analytical skills, strong written communication, strong oral communication. Okay, those are the kind of things you need to be emphasizing, even if it's not in the job description, because they are looking for that. In addition, there were a couple of other things that were further down the list that are still interesting for you to talk about, mention in your resume, and also potentially mention it in a cover letter, which is your ability to do multitasking and detail management. Because I can tell you, I was a senior executive for like 25 years, mostly in Europe, but I can tell you when I interviewed young people for entry-level jobs, the thing that I was most worried about, and I'm not the only one who worries about this, is are they going to let things fall between the cracks? Are they disorganized? Is this candidate disorganized? Okay, so that's where you should really be emphasizing your skill at detail management and multitasking. Okay, which essentially says in a more elegant way, I'm not going to let things fall through the crack. All right. Yeah, and as I say, the last paragraph is just one sentence. Avoid the temptation to summarize in the last paragraph what you said in the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, because this isn't like some research paper, some 10-page research paper you wrote for a professor where you do need to summarize what you said in the previous 9 pages. This is just 4 or 5 paragraphs, right? Don't summarize. Just thank you for considering me, and that's it. Okay. Any questions about any of that stuff? I'm going pretty fast, but all right, let's keep going. Federal internships, pathways internships. You may have heard of them. They pretty much don't exist. Right? I mean, I think I saw one posting for a pathways internship. I can't remember what agency it was with, that I saw last fall. Okay. And they're pretty much gone. And it's really sad because typically we were talking about dozens, if not 100 pathways internships every semester and summer from a variety of federal agencies. But the Trump administration has pretty much killed that. And as I mentioned about Int'l agencies before, they maintain their own internship programs with long lead times. I'm not going to repeat what I said about the CIA and others, but you got the idea. If you are younger, meaning you might be a first-year student or a sophomore, and you're willing to do an unpaid internship in order to get your foot in the door, certain departments of government do a lot of volunteer internships, and some of them still do them, even in the Trump administration. Actually, DOJ, I would kind of knock off that list, not just because of what they do these days, but because I haven't seen them post volunteer internships. But Treasury does them, the International Trade Administration, which is part of the Commerce Department, the Export-Import Bank, and a few others here and there offer volunteer internship programs. Typically, that's going to be 10, 15 hours a week. And you have an opportunity to intern and get some experience and be able to put it on your resume, okay? I am hoping that they meaning the Trump people, will will again do what's known as the virtual federal internship program, which typically offers hundreds of unpaid virtual internships. So if they're in the summertime, whether you're back at home where you came from or whether you're here, you can do those. Actually, they tend to be more than summer. They tend to be over anywhere from 6 to 12 months. But that's another opportunity to get your foot in the door. If you have reservations about, and I'm trying to keep this as unpolitical, as non-political as I can, and it's hard. If you have reservations about working for the current administration, fully understand, okay? If some of these agencies will be a bit less politicized than others, and there may be opportunities there. That's all I can really say about that. And let's keep going. So where are you going to search? Here's what's basically open to you in the DC area. First of all, there's 3 levels of government, and you could be thinking about, for example, the District of Columbia does a lot of internships, the District of Columbia government, okay? And internships there involve social justice, law enforcement, the court system, a lot of different parts of DC government, and that's a possibility. And that, DC is not a state, at least not yet, but maybe there will be someday. And then in terms of local governments, we could be talking about some of the counties that are accessible to you via the metro. Montgomery County, Maryland. I mean, I live in Montgomery County and I'm a 6-minute drive from here, although most of Montgomery County is a lot further away. 1.3 million people live in Montgomery County, and they have a lot of internships within their police department and other aspects of the court system and other places. A lot of those internships are going to be in Rockville, which is accessible by metro. There's also Prince George's County, Maryland. Nearly 1 million people live there. Again, possibilities for internships there. If you're thinking more in terms of Northern Virginia, it's basically Arlington, Alexandria, and Fairfax County that are more easily accessible and might have possibilities there. The nonprofit community 600,000 people in the DC area work for nonprofit organizations. We're talking about jobs, not internships. But there's tons of internships. And if you access, and any of you already access my Twitter account? 1, 2, okay, maybe 3 people.
I don't have a Twitter.
Say again?
What is your Twitter account?
At AU_SPA careers. If you access it, you'll know what it is because it's 15 to 20 internships and jobs every day. Okay. And I'm not limiting it to SBA students. If you're not SBA, you can. It's a private account.
At AU_.
Okay, I probably shouldn't have gotten into this now, but I did. At AU_SPA careers. When you go to that address, it's going to say tweets are protected. Click follow to request access. So you click follow, and that sends me a message, a direct message over Twitter. Since I do not sit at a control room, I check a couple times a day to see if anybody's asked for access, and then I give you access, and that's that. There now, it is Twitter, and I know Elon Musk, and lately there's been even more nutty stories about Twitter and Musk and what is it, Grok? Is it called? The one where you can ask questions about Elon Musk and it'll tell you how great and wonderful he is from their AI. But anyway, I started this account in 2014 on Twitter, long before Elon Musk was on the scene. And I've looked around to see whether I can transfer it to something else. And there's nothing else that is as user-friendly for me to use, and to some degree for you too. I'm thinking about Substack, but I haven't. It's going to be a lot of work for me to do that, and I'm only going to do that in the summertime probably. But don't count on that happening yet. But here's the thing: it's because it's a private account. There's no hate speech. All it is me and some other people within the career operation tweeting to you. That's it. Okay, it's one-way communication. It's really valuable, and there won't be any hate speech. There won't be any bullying. There won't be any of that, all that craziness, and there won't be any Elon Musk either. So, you know, that's ease your mind about Twitter, at least in terms of this particular account. Federal contractors. There are fewer jobs with federal contractors, particularly the Department of Education, U.S. Agency for International Development, which doesn't exist anymore, you may know. But there are a lot of other federal contractors, particularly in defense and national security, and there can be internships there, I can tell you. And then the nonprofit community. The thing is this about nonprofit internships. They are all over the place in terms of subject matter and function, like what you're actually going to do. You might work in the communications office. You might be doing some kind of research, you know, significant policy research. It might be in transportation policy or social justice or civil rights or a lot of other things that I can't think, environmental activism, a lot of other things I can't think of at the moment. And you'll see a lot of that, by the way, on the Twitter account. And I only post the paid ones. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that do unpaid internships, some, I should say, and I just, by and large, I don't bother to post them. If you're interested in public health, by the way, there is an organization called the American Public Health Association, APHA, yeah, American Public Health Association. They're quite prestigious, and they don't pay their interns. And they offer 12, 15, 20 internships every semester. They don't pay. So, you know, that's a big exception of a prestigious organization that has not gotten the memo about paid internships. Then there's the corporate sector. And by that, I mean corporations that are not necessarily just government contractors. And a lot of them are consulting firms, political consulting firms, public affairs consulting firms, communication consulting firms. They overlap a lot. Management consulting. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities for internships there. If you're interested in politics, because this year is an election year for Congress, there will be a fair amount of activity of internships in terms of various political consulting firms. Generally speaking, their political consulting firms are not bipartisan, okay? They work one side of the fence or the other. And so if you're on one side of the fence and you don't want to work the other side, you want to make sure before you apply which side they're on. When I tweet internships for these firms, I generally identify them as to whether they're Republican or Democratic, okay? That's that. Any questions? No? Okay. Let's keep going. Now, let's talk, we're doing a deeper dive here as the slide sort of indicates. How do you focus your search process? First of all, you ask yourself, well, what do I want to be? What kind of internships do I want that would lead me in that direction? You may not be ready to answer that question, but it is one that you could at least think about a little bit, okay? And where do you want to be? Are you here because you want to be in DC? Or are you thinking about other places? And if you're from California, maybe you want to be going back in the summertime. Yeah.
That applies to me. I'm from California.
And?
I just found it funny that you accidentally.
A little louder, I mean, there's a lot of noise.
I just found it a little funny that you accidentally identified my exact situation.
Okay. Well, and what I was about to say was, if you want to be going back to California, whether it's Sacramento or LA or San Francisco or wherever, you want to be thinking about what internship opportunities are available there, and there will be a lot. I mean, California is a big state with a lot of things going on, and you're going to need to focus on that. And also, what kind of internship do I want? If you're focused, as many of you I suspect are, on a career of doing some sort of policy analysis in different fields, then you're going to want to try to get an internship that is research focused in some way. It's probably not going to be called policy analyst intern, but maybe something like research intern. And what employment sector? So again, the nonprofit sector, contractors, politics, management consulting, et cetera, okay? Do you want to get an internship with a small employer or a large employer? And here's the difference, aside from obvious things about how many people work there. Large employers will generally support you better in your internship in terms of well-defined things that you're going to do, a fairly clear hierarchy of people that you work with and report to, okay? And fairly well-defined projects that you'll work on, etc. Smaller employers, it's not, I don't mean to paint a picture of it being chaos, but it'll be less well-defined, but you may have the opportunity to do a lot broader range of activities, okay? You may be able to do some research, but also reach out into other things like activism, for example. The kind of writing you do, you may be able to get into do some communications as well as some hardcore research. If you've got a data analytic background, you may be able to do some of that. You'll have more opportunity that way with a small employer. I was CEO of a small refugee relief organization for a while, and we brought in interns, and they, if they suggested, hey, I think I could help out here or there, we would say yes, fine, great. Generally speaking, with larger employers, they will say no, because we've already got interns that work in that department, you're in this department. So that's kind of the difference between larger and smaller employers. Can you do an attractive but unpaid internship? Well, yes, you can. I've already talked about that. You may want to identify specific employers that do internships whom you want to track, okay? This is early in the process. There've been a lot of internships already posted, but the bulk of them are still to come, okay? For the rest of January, all of February, all of March, and a little bit of April too. And then find the relevant postings. My Twitter account actually is a pretty good resource, but where else? If you're looking for nonprofit internships, one of the places to look is idealist.org. How many of you were familiar with Idealist? I'm just curious. Usually people are not. Almost nobody is. Idealist.org only posts nonprofit jobs and internships. It posts a lot more jobs than it does internships. But you will see in the DC area maybe 7 or 8 or 10 internships a week that it will post. Jobs, it'll post 20 a day, 5 days a week. Oh, by the way, for my Twitter account, I didn't mention, I post 5 days a week. As I say, I don't do weekends and I don't do windows. And the tweets are generally done by 10:45 in the morning, okay? And typically we're talking about 15, 18 tweets a day. And if you multiply that out, it works out eventually to around 300 a month. So you find the relevant postings, they appear to you, and you apply promptly. Now, where else can you look besides my Twitter account? I'm kind of glossing over the other sources besides Idealist. A really good resource is LinkedIn.com jobs, where you can also look for internships. LinkedIn.com is the best of the mainstream job search and internship search engines, but you've got to use it properly. The big problem with LinkedIn and also Indeed.com, which is the second best one, is that if you don't use the filters and you don't use really good search terms, you're going to find yourself weeding through 200 postings, a day, of which maybe 5 or 10 are actually relevant to you. And you're going to do that for about 2 days and then say, forget this, right? So, and I'll speak only to LinkedIn. When you go to LinkedIn.com jobs, okay, so you're logged into LinkedIn, all right? And then at the top of the homepage, there is a briefcase icon that says jobs. So you click on that, and then you're into the job search engine, which you can also use to look for internships. You need to start your search. Basically, they give you 2 fields, right? Search term and where. So, research intern, Washington, D.C., maybe, for example. And you hit enter. Then magically, a whole series of filters appear just below those search fields. And not all of them are important, but a couple of them are very important. One of them is date posted. If you don't limit the date posted range that you're looking at, you will look at it on LinkedIn and on Indeed, you will be looking at postings as much as 6 months old. And most of them don't say when they were posted. So you see this great internship and think, wow, I'm gonna apply to that. And it's been long gone for months, okay? So date posted, your options are gonna be past 24 hours, past week, past month, and anytime, which means 6 months, basically. My best suggestion is that you select the past week date posting range, and that means you're going to use LinkedIn once a week so that you don't miss anything, okay? If you actually were to use it every day, you could just say past 24 hours. Most people are not that obsessive compulsive to do that. And the other filter you're going to see, I believe it's titled experience. When you click on it, there's a drop-down menu that says internship, entry level, associate level, mid-level, senior executive. So you're going to click on internships, right? When you get into the job market, most of you, I think, are going to click on entry level. All right. So that's another way of filtering down this huge number of postings that they want to throw at you in these 2 places. By the way, Glassdoor.com, if you've used it, is pretty good. It's not quite as good as Indeed or LinkedIn, but it is pretty good. The best use of Glassdoor.com is that you can use it to find out for major employers what kind of questions are asked in interviews. You could, if you were going to interview for mostly jobs, not internships, at say a big think tank, you could type in the name of that think tank within Glassdoor, and you get to a point where people will have posted the kinds of interview questions they've been asked. But you got to make sure that these are people who interviewed for a job that's roughly similar to what you're interviewing for, because you could go off on an inappropriate tangent about questions that you're not going to be asked. Applying properly, I've already talked about that. Then you got to prepare for interviews, okay? There's a number of ways of preparing. How many of you have used Big Interview, which is available through the handshake system? One lonely person. Okay, so Big Interview in Handshake, on the homepage, on the left side, you click on resources. And then what will come up, one of the things among several that comes up is Big Interview. It sounds a little corny, but it's actually a good resource. You click on that, And it offers you a series of menus that you can use to actually have yourself ask questions. And then when you answer the questions, you are recorded. And most people I find are their own worst critics when they're looking at, themselves being recorded answering questions. But you also probably, by the way, are thinking, well, what about a career advisor? Absolutely. The only sort of caveat I would offer about a career advisor and mock interviews is today's Thursday, maybe somebody phones you, let's go back to Tuesday. Let's say it's Tuesday. An employer phones and says, we want to do an interview with you at 2:00 on Thursday. Maybe the career advisor you need to talk to is not available during that time. Although there could be other career advisors you might be able to get interview prep with. Okay. But most career advisors, I think all the career advisors are trained to do mock interviews and also not just mock interviews, but to give you ideas about the kind of questions you should be asked. And also, since close to 100% of initial interviews are on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, also how to make the best impression in those interviews. Basically they can see you from about here up, so look good from about here up, okay? And, professionally dressed, your hair's combed, no distracting jewelry or clothing. What else? And no distracting background, okay? If there is distracting background, fuzzy, you probably all of you know how to fuzzy it up, fuzzy the background up. I can't tell you about how many unmade beds I've looked at in appointments that I've had with students, but they're not interviewing me for jobs, so that's okay, okay? But not okay for an employer, all right? And then, if you get an offer, there's going to be salary, there's not going to be salary negotiations for an internship. It's typically going to be, if you're an undergrad, it's in DC and Maryland, where the minimum wage is $18 an hour, that's what they're going to offer. And in Virginia, I think it's $16 an hour because, they used to be part of the Confederacy, I guess. I shouldn't say things like that. It gets me in trouble. But I think it's $16 an hour. Maybe the new Democratic governor is going to, and the legislature up that. But so you're not going to be able to negotiate a salary. The only things you can negotiate with regard to internships when you get an offer is how often do I have to be in the office? Typically, they'll want you in a couple days a week. And here's the thing, you want to get to know the people in the office, right? Now, they are probably also working hybrid schedules. And hybrid in DC these days tends to mean 3 days a week in the office for most jobs, okay? So being in the office for people like you is pretty important in terms of getting to know people better, getting an understanding of the office culture. A lot of employers, actually, if you're hired for an internship, will say, well, your first 2 weeks, we want you in the office 100% of the time, because they want to know that you're absorbing everything you need to absorb there about how they work and how they get things done, and particularly with regard to whom your supervisor and your coworkers are. And then you show up, okay? So that's, in summary. Anybody have questions about that inverted pyramid at all? No? Okay. I'm going to keep going. Search term. Okay, I talked a little bit about that before. Functional terms, these aren't the only ones you would use, but for example, I want a job in advocacy or electoral politics or democratic politics or Republican politics or lobbying or management consulting, public affairs, policy analysis, etc. By the way, there's a lot of internships offered by lobbying firms. Corporate lobbying firms tend to work for anybody, okay? They are not Democratic versus Republican. They are just whatever clients they have. And when you take an internship with a corporate lobbying firm, understand that you may be asked to work on things that maybe you are not especially pleased to be doing, okay? I'll give you an example. I actually, I was a lobbyist a lot of my life, but I was in Europe and I was lobbying for the United Nations and for at the international headquarters of World Wildlife Fund. So I was with the good guys, so to speak. But when I came back to the U.S., I took a job with a firm that I thought were the good guys. I won't bore you with all the details, but and mostly what they did after I'd worked there for 2 weeks, they said, well, actually, we don't want you in Washington. We want you in Africa, where I'd spent a lot of time in my career. And then they told me I was going to a country which I immediately knew was a very dangerous place, and that's where I ended up. But I got out safe and sound because I got a lot of security training. But I was back from that country at one point for about a week, and I was in the DC office. And the lady who owned the firm, who was also the CEO, said, "Oh, you're back. I forgot you're back. I want you to be at a meeting that we're going to have this afternoon because we've got a new account. It's with Federal Express." And I immediately felt a little bit stunned because I know a lot about Federal Express. And, you don't have to agree with me, but I know that they are extremely anti-union, very, very politically conservative, but particularly in terms of the way they treat their workers. The average driver, the happy driver that delivers you stuff from Federal Express is probably not that happy because that person is usually working upwards of 80 hours a week to make what most people would make in 40 hours a week because they're independent business people. They're not really employees of Federal Express, most of them. And I knew this, and I thought, Federal Express, I mean, my great-grandfather came to the U.S. And was an organizer of the dock workers union in New York. And I thought I'll be disgracing the memory of my great-grandfather and my grandfather and my father, all of whom were union members, if I were to do this. So I actually, believe it or not, thought up an excuse. I did go to that meeting, but they wanted me to get more involved, and I thought up an excuse. I made up a phony reason, but I have to get back to this dangerous country where my life is going to be in danger, just to get away from having to work on the Federal Express account. I only tell you that story because that's how quickly it can change on a dime. All of a sudden, you're being asked to do something for a place that you're not particularly pleased with. Now, that doesn't happen a lot. A lot of the lobbying is sort of neutral, but a lot of it's not. I mean, if you're lobbying for pharmaceutical companies, the issue there is minimize our competition and let us charge as much money as we can for the drugs that we produce. And that's a big reason why healthcare is so expensive in the US. But anyway, so there's the functional terms, and then there's subject area. I don't think I have to define that. Are you interested in healthcare policy or children's rights or refugee relief or reproductive health, civil rights, social justice, housing, homelessness, etc.? Okay. There's a lot more than that, but that's what I wanted to fit on the slide. So those are the ways to think about how you use your search terms. Questions about that? Nope. Okay, let's keep going. I've already talked about a bit of this already. Why did I say I post 100 to 150 internships a month? Oh, internships, yeah. I post about 300 jobs and internships monthly, of which anywhere from 100 to 150 are internships, okay? Right now, probably 75% of what I'm posting are internships. And jobs tend to be, at this time of year, the job posting market, so to speak, is slow from Thanksgiving all the way through the middle of January. And I noticed just today, I started to see a lot more jobs showing up if you're in the job market. But right now, you'll notice when you look at the Twitter account, if you go back to when I started posting after the holiday season on January 5th, 75% of what's there, maybe even 80% are internships. But that's an unusual time of year. And again, idealist.org, only nonprofits are allowed to post there for jobs or internships. LinkedIn, as I said, best of the big search engines. Indeed.com and Glassdoor are also good. Handshake, okay. I don't look at Handshake very much because I'm not a student, but the feedback I get from students is that the vast bulk of the internships they see there are unpaid. Has that been the experience, or would any of you disagree with that? You can disagree. I'm not going to bite your head off. You agree, pretty much? Okay. That's kind of the way it is, all right? I realize it could change over time, but I don't have the time to go searching through internships and find paid ones in Handshake. And so I do not, on the Twitter account I maintain, I don't post anything from Handshake, with the exception of promoting some upcoming events, like I promoted this event on the Twitter account, for example. So that's that in terms of internship searching. Yeah, again, I've pretty much talked about, well, some of these things I haven't mentioned. So limit your search. I say, 7 or 14 days. I would probably try to look on, say, LinkedIn or Indeed at least once a week, and therefore limit your search to the past week. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to remember whether LinkedIn asks you to do this or if it's just Indeed. One of the two, and maybe both, ask you to define a search radius around the city you're looking. For DC, it should be about 25 miles. That's pretty much the limit of the metro rail system in terms of your ability to get around fairly well. All right. Other cities, if you're going back to some small city in the Midwest, maybe your search radius is 10 miles. Use good search terms, obviously. They are all going to have a filter that says remote. There's two reasons why you should use that filter. Number one, a lot of employers are not good about identifying whether or not a job is remote. And secondly, if you take a remote position, the big downside for you is you don't get to know people as well in the office. Now, maybe you have to do that because you're going back to, trying to think of a place that I've been to that I really didn't like. Des Moines, Iowa. I'm not going to explain why I didn't like it, but it's small, it's kind of provincial, and maybe you're from there and that's where you're going to go back to for the summer. Maybe then you really do want to look for a remote internship because there may not be very many in Des Moines. But generally speaking, remote internships for all of you at this stage of your careers are generally not going to work as well because you just don't get to know people as well. And also make sure you're only filtering for internships. You will notice even on LinkedIn, which has better algorithms, but still not perfect, you'll say you only want to look at internships and then you're looking at jobs. I mean, I can remember in the early days of LinkedIn, I was an independent consultant and a couple of my contracts were running out. So I started looking for jobs, which is actually how I ended up here. But I'd be looking at stuff and it was giving me jobs that I was totally unqualified for, welders and stuff like that. And and also, by the way, when you search for internships, if you use that as a search term, you should say internship, not just intern. And the reason is interns are what doctors are called in their first year out of medical school when they're usually in a hospital. And you'll find yourself getting postings for positions for physicians at hospitals. Have a question? No? Okay. There's a filter called company. And if you click on it, what you'll see is individual employers, okay? The reason not to use that is that it limits your search to whatever employers you've clicked on, all right? And so I just generally wouldn't use that filter. The salary filter for internships, if you're an undergrad, it's going to be around $18 an hour. If you're a grad student, they might offer you $20 an hour, sometimes $22, maybe, if they're feeling generous that day. But don't try to do. And also, by the way, when you get to the point where you're negotiating, where you're looking for jobs, don't try to figure out what jobs pay if they don't say it in the job description. Just let them get interested in you, and then find out what it's going to pay. Okay. Any questions? Oh, and by the way, that's what the filter, the bottom of the slide, that's kind of what the filters look like. Past week would be the filter for date posted, right? Internship would be the one that says, I think it says experience. And then there's salary, company, remote, etc. Okay. What are AU career resources? I've highlighted mine in yellow because it's important. And the other Twitter accounts for SIS and SOC and CAS and COGAT don't do that much job posting. A little, or I should say internship rather. I'm not saying they're not useful. They are, but they don't run their accounts the way I do. Okay, you're not going to see 75 jobs and internships a week on those other accounts. And those other accounts are all open. Okay, you don't have to ask for permission to access it. Okay. And alumni fire. Has anyone used alumni fire here? Anyone want to talk about their experience with it? So that I don't have to keep talking. Come on, somebody volunteer, please. Please? No? I mean, if you have something negative to say, that's okay, but it's positive. Were you able, those of you who raised your hand, were you able to get in touch with people who were at least moderately helpful to you? I see people shaking their heads. Okay, that's not good. Well, all right, let me tell you how Alumni Fire works. First of all, if you don't know how to access it, go to Handshake, click on, go to the homepage. On the left side, the link says resources. You go there, and that's how you can access Alumni Fire. You have to register for Alumni Fire. It's free. All they want is your name and your email address, I think. Anyway, they might want your AU student ID number. I don't know. And when you get in, these days there might be maybe 4,000 alumni who have signed up and they have volunteered to be helpful. That is very different than the 150,000 or whatever it is AU alumni who are on LinkedIn. There's a lot of alumni there, but they haven't volunteered to do anything. They just posted their profiles on LinkedIn. And they're mainly using it to network and probably to look for jobs, in some cases, internships. In the case of Alumni Fire, these are people who volunteer to be helpful. So what happens is, and by the way, don't just look for alumni who are in your specific academic, if you're an undergrad major or your specific graduate program, if you're a grad student. Because a lot of people end up doing things that are very different than what they thought they might be doing, okay? And what you would want to do is do a search in terms of the subject matter you're looking for. Is it international internships? Is it transportation policy, et cetera? And then people's names will pop up, okay? And what happens is you can send them a message. And the way it works is you don't get their email address. You send it up to the Alumni Fire account, and then it goes back down to them. So it protects their privacy, okay? And then they message it back. And my experience in terms of what students tell me is that they do get responses way more than you would get by reaching out to people on LinkedIn, okay? I would hazard a guess that maybe 15 to 20% of the people you would reach out to on LinkedIn would actually respond to you, whereas a much higher percentage, 75% or more, would respond to you from Alumni Fire, although it's a much smaller group of people, okay? There's a really important word to use when you message these people. The word is briefly, okay? And I'm not joking about this. I would like to speak to you briefly about, an internship that I'm seeking with your employer, something to that effect. You always want to say that because it puts their mind at rest that you're not looking for an hour of their time or something like that, okay? And keep the emails short and sweet. Nobody reads long emails. None of you do. Don't expect other people to. And so that's Alumni Fire. Any questions about it? No? Okay, let's keep going. So, have a career advisor, review your resume and cover letter template. If you're an SIS, they have their own career center, okay? If you're in COGAT, they have their own career center. If you, but SOC, CAS, SPA, School of Education, that's all part of the main career center, and there are specific advisors that are assigned to the various schools, okay? And don't always assume you can get an appointment the next day, by the way, because I tend to be booked up 2 or 3 days ahead of time. So you could probably get an appointment with me for Friday if you're an SPA senior or grad student, but don't just assume you can see someone really, really quickly, because the most finite resource of any career advisor is their available appointment slots. You can also email them if you have a quick question, and I do mean a quick question, because 50% of the emails I get from students say, I have a quick question, and it's a very complicated question. And I don't write memos. So I will generally say, please make an appointment with me, okay? Start searching early in the internship posting cycle. Oh, there's drop-ins. I forgot about drop-ins. I was available for drop-ins from 2 to 4 p.m. today, and 0 people showed up. Maybe just because the first week of the semester. I'm not available every day for drop-ins. I'm available mostly on Mondays, but this week it was Wednesday. Anyway, when you go for a drop-in, you have to show up physically at the Career Center, not on Zoom. It's the 5th floor Butler Pavilion. It's the only thing on the 5th floor if you've never been there, other than the parking garage. So I think you can tell the two apart. And those sessions are limited to 15 minutes, okay? Because we got to roll through people. Appointments can be 30 minutes or 60 minutes, depending on how complicated the subject matter is that you want to discuss with the career groups. Start searching early in the internship posting cycle. I think I've already made that point to you. And well, if you can search several times weekly, do that, but at least once a week. And if you're gonna do it once a week, that means you got to devote an hour and a half. And apply quickly. It's really important. Don't be slowed down by cover letter writing. And by the way, career advisors can also look at, a recent cover letter you've written and give you ideas about how your cover letter should generally look. There's a real danger of using AI to write cover letters. And here, I'll give you some of the reasons why. First of all, if people like you with roughly similar credentials are using ChatGPT to write a cover letter for them, guess what? The person who gets those cover letters is going to notice that the cover letters are very similar. I mean, that's the way ChatGPT works, as well as the other AIs. Secondly, a lot of times it'll be written in kind of, you probably know this from using it, it's a stilted kind of tone that doesn't, to some degree, sound like a human being actually wrote it. And some big companies have very sophisticated software to detect, how much AI has written stuff. And when they are convinced that you use AI to write the cover letter, they might just toss your whole application. And most of the time they will. It would be okay if you've got a paragraph that you're having trouble writing, and you know how to ask prompts of let's say ChatGPT to get good information from it, then use it to help you out with a paragraph. But never ask you to just write a whole cover letter. By the way, with regard to LinkedIn, you'll look up an internship and you'll say, "Well, I want to apply for this," and then it'll say, "It was posted 12 hours ago, and 100 people have applied for this." Here's what's happening. People all over the country are using AIs not just to write their cover letters, but to write their resumes. And so they go to a particular thing, and then they tell ChatGPT, write my resume for this particular internship or job, write a cover letter for this. And then they just crank it out and send it in, because it took them, 3 minutes to do that? HR people who handle a lot of this stuff are not happy with that trend, because they're getting bombarded with a lot of AI written content, and they are getting better and better at throwing it out. So that's a reason not to do that, and a good reason why you should be absolutely writing your own resumes. Interview prep. The best way you can prep for an interview is to read up well on an employer, particularly their on their website. In interviews, the most important advice I can give about interviews, the first thing I tell people when I'm doing interview prep with them is upbeat and energetic for every moment of the interview, because who would hire someone who's not, right? So even if you're not feeling well and you got the flu or whatever, hopefully you're on Zoom and you're not in person. But you've got to be upbeat and energetic. It's got to come in. It's got to be reflected in your voice, in your facial expressions, etc. Okay, that's really the most important thing. There's a whole bunch of other things I say about interview prep. I'm not going to go into that today because this is not that kind of session. If you really want to get an internship in a particular field for the summer, you should be applying to 3 to 5 a week, starting around now. let's say you applied to 3 a week for 12 weeks, right? That's 36 internships. Now you may think to yourself, "Why is he crazy? 36 internships?" Here's the thing. That doesn't mean you're going to get 36 interviews. Quite the contrary. You're probably going to get 10 to 15% of them asking you to do interviews. Assuming you have, done a good job with your resume, especially, and you've applied to things for which you are reasonably well qualified. 10% of 36 is, like 4, right? And 15% would be what, 7 or 8? So, or actually fewer than that. Now, that's actually more for jobs. Internships, you might apply to 36 internships and get 8 or 10 employers asking to interview you, and that's good. But remember, the 36 jobs shrinks very quickly down to the number who are actually going to do an interview with you. That's why you need to apply to a lot of places. And that's really all I can say. And also, by the way, if you've done an interview and you think, I really nailed it, they're going to make me an offer, keep applying. I can tell you, and I've had this experience myself personally, where I really nailed it. I'm going to get that job, and then, dear Mr. SanGeorge, we've decided to go in another direction. You know how those emails go, another direction. So I learned that lesson hard early in my career. Don't try to learn, just keep applying until you've actually accepted something, okay? And I think that's the last slide. Yeah, it is. So let's go back to that one. Questions about, let's see, what time is it? Anybody tell me what time it is?
7 o'clock, 7:03.
Okay,
It's 7:00.
it's 7, so actually we're going an hour, more or less. So if you need to leave. If I'm willing to hang around a little bit if you've got questions you want to ask that you didn't want to ask in front of 30 people. But yeah, thank you for coming, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
See your grad student.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
I did have one question. When you say read up on the employer, what do you mean, like say their mission statement in the interview?
oh, absolutely. Well,
They've got like a blurb that they like.
yeah, you want to know what their mission statement is. I wouldn't try regurgitating it word for word. But